welcome to episode 167 of The Route. The Route is a glorified coffee chat in podcast form that takes you from A to B with a new guest every episode. As always, I'm your host, Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we begin, a couple things to cover as per usual. First, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast, follow the podcast, rate 5 stars on the podcast, whatever you need to do, this is the time to do it. We're on 10 audio platforms, so that's all the big ones. Google, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and I believe 4 to 6 other different platforms. So if you want to listen to us, you can find us. We're available there. And just by subscribing, following, rating 5 stars, it just allows the podcast to grow a little bit easier. So check us out there, The Route Podcast. And with that as well, in addition to the audio podcast, we do video as well for the last maybe 100 plus episodes now, and that's available on YouTube at The Routecast, or if you simply search up The Route Podcast, it'll pop up for you there. And on that platform, as I mentioned, you'll see the video podcast, but you'll also see clips. We have a clip that comes out every day for that week's episode, so you can get a little bit of insight in regards to what's getting discussed, what are some key points, and then if you haven't already, you can tune into the episode and you can see it as a little bit of a trailer. And that's available too on all of our platforms from TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, I think I said Instagram, so on and so forth, at the Routecast for the weekend. We announce each guest as well on the Tuesday. And if you haven't heard of it already too, since we're talking about more about what you're doing in your route, how to get from A to B in your career, we have a LinkedIn page, which is actually probably one of our better accounts, where it's at the Routecast on LinkedIn, and you can connect with myself, the guest, or like-minded people to grow your network, maintain it, or even just start it. So check us out there at the Routecast. Follow, subscribe, rate 5 stars, watch all of our content, engage with it, and the podcast can continue. So with that, we can get into today's guest. I'd now like to welcome someone who has a wealth of experience in the communications world, with 20 plus years of experience from sports to the classroom, and now driving engagement, Director of Social Engagement Strategy at Umpires Media, Erik Grosman. Welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Very good, Christopher. Thank you so much for having me, man, and good to connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely, Erik. I'm excited to get into it. You have a very unique route, as I was saying, where there's so much that's taking place, and I think with that, I think we should dive right into it, and we can cover as much as possible. So, the typical question for the podcast, take me through your route. So, where did it begin, and how did it get to where we are today?
Yeah, so, my route was pretty straightforward. It was not getting there, but when I, developed the concept of exactly what I wanted to do. So when I was growing up, my favorite thing was baseball. Like, I just loved baseball. I loved the Blue Jays. They were like my favorite team. I'd go to all their games. I was such a super fan. And then, graduate high school, it's like, okay, well, what do I want to do now, right? I'm like, well, for me, it was obvious. I just want to work for the Blue Jays. Like, I didn't care what it was. I didn't care when it was. I just knew that I just wanted to work for them. And so what I did was I kind of angled my schooling based on that. And I knew right away that I'm not a school person. Like, I wasn't a fan of school, period. So university wasn't going to be the thing for me. So Brock University had a good sports program, but I knew I couldn't do that. I knew it had to be in sports for me to get to where I wanted to go. So I said, okay, what if I'm not going to go to university, then what am I going to be able to have when it comes time to get this job? It has to be experience. You're going to need experience. You're not going to have the school, so you need experience. And you're going to need to work really hard to get into the sports business. From everything I heard, it's like, people make it sound like it's virtually impossible. So that's what I decided to do. I went to Durham College and their sports admin program, not just because it was a sports admin, but because they offered an internship as part of their third year of their program. So you do your first 2 years in school, and then your third year you're just working for the credit to get to graduate. So I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do here? I didn't love sports, at the time, marketing and advertising and all those things. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to do that either, but I still want to get to my goal, which is to work for the Blue Jays. So I said, I'm going to find a job that's really out there, something that would impress somebody later on. So I ended up finding a job in the U.S. So I worked for a school as a sports information assistant for a Division II school, Florida Southern College in Lakeland, Florida. So I went down there. My parents literally went down with me. They dropped me off. They left me at a hotel in Lakeland. Said, "Well, go, good luck to you, right? So I'm like, okay, well, so this is where we start, right? And so I'm thrown right into the fire. I got no idea. Collegiate, in the U.S., college sports it's for anyone who knows, it's insane. So like I'm just like running around like chicken with my head cut off, and I just managed to do it. I got through it, and I realized this is exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in that sports, live sports, working for a team or working for an organization of some. I knew it. I have to get this thing. So this is I'm hoping now when I'm done, I come back home that this is going to help me land this job with the Blue Jays, for example. So I get back home. Okay, I graduate, and I'm like, okay, well, let's just try. So I literally found, this was back in 2001, I do believe. I think it was the summer of 2001. So I'm like, I'm going to find every single email address I can find at the Blue Jays, and I'm just going to start firing my resume. I sent it to like 20 different people at the Blue Jays, and I think one of them got back to me. Yeah, so one of them got back to me. It was at a call center in their ticket department. So she's like, if you can come on down, we'd love to meet you, have an interview, blah, blah, blah. I said, that's great. So I'm like really excited about this. Like, here we go, right? And then what happened was, there was one day I was sitting in my living room, doing absolutely nothing. I was literally staring at the wall, right? And my dad comes in to the room, and he has a Toronto Sun. So there was this article about this new team that's coming to Toronto called the Toronto Phantoms, and they're an arena football team. For anyone who knows arena football, it's indoor football, basically like actual football, not soccer. So so I'm like, okay, and my dad's like, well, here, I just read an article, new team in the city, there's a number at the bottom, and that's if you want to call to get tickets. He goes, well, don't worry about that. Why don't you just call that number and ask them for any job that they have, anything, right? And I said, oh that's better than what I'm doing now, so it doesn't hurt. I go, well, why is this like so interested? Like, why are you finding it so interesting? He goes, well, I read it said here that the president and CEO of the Phantoms is Rob Godfrey, and his dad is Paul Godfrey, and Paul Godfrey was the president of the Blue Jays at the time. So he's like, well, you never know, and they're both owned by Rogers, so you never know. It doesn't. What do you have to lose? Just call the number, ask for a job. It's exactly what I did. The first time, it was like maybe the first and only time I ever listened to my dad. And I'm glad I did that time. So I call the number, and the guy goes, someone picks up the phone. I said, hi, I'm Erik. I'm looking for a job. And it's like, okay, well, we don't really have anything. Like, we're really small, but but here's this guy, Steven. You talk to this guy, and he'll, he works and he's the PR guy, and he'll probably give you a job. So I talked to this guy, Steven, and Steven's like, look, Erik, you sound great, very, enthusiastic, but we don't have any money. We can't pay you. So you're going to have to do this on a volunteer basis. I said, okay, well, why don't I come down and meet you anyway, and we'll just see. The same day I went and met him was the same day I went to that Blue Jays interview at the call center. So the first place I went was the Blue Jays. So I went in there, and walking in there and seeing what's happening was pretty crazy too. Like being inside the Rogers Center and just seeing all that stuff happen. So I get taken down to the call center, which is like in their basement. And then the person who interviewed me, it was fine, everything was good, but I was looking around the room like, this is exactly where I thought I wanted to be. And I started looking around like, it's a call center, you have your headset on, and I'm watching, I'm like, I said, that's just not me. That's just not me. It's great, but I can't see myself doing that. It's just, so then I'm like, okay, but I didn't say no, I didn't say yes. They said, yeah, you can think about it, for a couple days, whatever, no problem. So then I go to my interview with the Toronto Phantoms, and I go there, and everyone's like, you're starting your season soon. There's 5 or 6, 7 people. That's it. That's all they have. That's all the employees they have. Everyone's doing 20 million different things. And they're like, look, Erik, I said, if you want the job, you can start tomorrow. And we have all these things you can do. It's not going to be pretty. I'm just going to tell you that right now. It's not going to be pretty, but you're going to get your hands dirty, and you're going to see what it's like, to work in a professional sports team. I said, I couldn't believe I did it. I had it right there. I could have had the Blue Jays job, but I actually passed it up, and I said, no, I'll do the Phantoms one instead. So that's what I did. I volunteered there for a year and a half, and just like magic happens. It wasn't magic. It was a lot of hard work, and there was many times I said, I'll forget this. This is crazy. But in having the luxury of living at home, let's throw that in as well. That not everyone gets that luck as well. So I was fortunate to do that. And then what happened was, like a year and a half into it, the Blue Jays and Phantoms joined together, and they moved into the Rogers Center. So all the departments merged. and I got the Blue Jays job. I got to work in their communications, like the media relations department. You know, no interview, no nothing. Rob Godfrey literally brought me in there and another, you know, and said, "Here you go." I said, "Let's hope, you know, this." He introduced me to the guy in charge. He said, like, you know, he's going to be here, and like, I really hope it works out. You know, if it doesn't, whatever, but he's going to give it his best, and that's exactly what I did. I went. I couldn't believe it was happening, and here you are, like everything you wanted, everything you I set out to do was happening at that moment, and I was 23 years old, 24 years old. And I'm just like, this is, to be honest with you, like, I'm just rambling here, but like, to be honest, I probably wasn't like at a maturity, like my level of maturity at that point wasn't where it was supposed to be, because we can get into this later. This isn't even, you know, but like you can't be like a fan. You got to like, but your mindset is fan. Your mindset is everything you knew growing up. I know everything about baseball, blah, blah, blah. But when you get thrown into the fire, there it was. Like I made it. I got exactly what I wanted at such an early point in my career, and that's really how it all got started.
Yeah, that's quite the story, right? Where there's so many things. I was just taking notes here, and there's a ton of things I want to get into. And I guess let's start at the beginning, and then we'll fill in the gaps, and then we'll get back to your route a little bit from there. Was there ever any, I don't want to say doubt, but let's say another lane that you looked into away from sports ever? Because I know that's what you're saying. You said maybe you weren't cut out for school either, but did you ever maybe look beyond sports? Yeah,
no.
That's a simple question.
No, you know, I'm just being honest. You know,
yeah, no, I love it.
No, I never. It was a target. It was literally, here's the bullseye. Here's your dart. Hit the dart, and that's it. Like, hit the bullseye, and that's it. That's what I wanted is what I got.
Yeah, and then building on that too, I think one of the interesting things I've heard from doing this podcast is, like, I remember when I was applying to university, right? I was going to business school, and they had different options. They had the co-op option, they had the regular option. Being, I don't know how old I was at the time, 16, 17, I didn't listen to my dad, maybe kind of similar to what you were saying there too, and he's like, do the co-op. I was like, I don't need a co-op, I can find a job on my own, and I don't want to make university 5 years instead of 4 years, right? And then now looking back on it, as you're saying this experience with Durham College where they kind of, you know, guided you into this internship or was part of your curriculum to graduate. So essentially, you're going to do this if you're going to finish the program. And from my experience from chatting with people too about co-ops or internships too that are within the program, that's what happens as well, and they get some amazing experience. So looking back now, I see how valuable that was. But do you mind maybe touching on that internship a bit further? Because I think we have people from all ages that listen, so I want to focus on that for the beginning for maybe those that are younger, and then we can kind of fill in the gaps from there. But what was that internship like? Because I'm assuming it played a major factor to get those jobs as the sports information officer going from there.
Yeah, I mean, look, like that, the job I got in the States, the internship was what led me to that job. So it's funny because that led me to that, and that leads me to this, and then we'll finish the story later. But everything leads to something. So the internship itself was, it was just, you have literally 6 or 7 people trying to put a show on, like, you know, a brand new team. It's just the amount of work that's involved behind the scenes to put together the visas, like for the players, they're all coming from the States, and like booking the air. We played at the Air Canada Center, like booking that, doing that. You can imagine if you only have 6 or 7 people that are working there, they're going to need as many hands as they can. So I started by just literally nothing's fancy. Like you have to almost, well, you don't have to. Me personally, what I did, I'm not saying everyone has to do it, but you swallow your pride to some point too. It depends how bad you want this. You have to think like, they don't need me as much as I feel like I need them, and there shouldn't be anything that's too like that you're so above that you, because again, the ultimate goal is what do you want, right? And if you want something, then you're gonna have to like do it, and you have to prove yourself, and you got to do what they're asking. Otherwise, no one's saying you have to come. You can leave at any point. In fact, there were 3 or 4 other interns at the time that they were just kind of weaving in and out, and eventually they just told them told them thank you so much, but we're gonna just stick with me. And it wasn't smarter than them. I wasn't like better than them. Like I didn't know the job better than them. Like it wasn't anything other than I just worked hard. I just had a good attitude and I worked hard. That's all it was. And I did all kinds of jobs for everybody. Like, yeah, sure, I was the assistant for like media relations, but they were throwing me around, like using, like, I don't hate the word using, but kind of is like, you know, corporate guy needs this. Can you do some research here? can you go and get me this thing here? I had to get lunch for the coaching staff one day. Like, like I could say no, and then that's it, right? You don't have to. No one's forcing you to do anything. I chose to do all those things because the goal in my mind was where I wanted to be. Like, I wanted to work for the Blue Jays. It was very specific, and I felt that this was a really good chance for me to do it. And that's the only thing I was looking at. And again, I hope I'm not making it sound, it wasn't easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it's literally determined like how bad you want it. That's all. That's what it came.
Yeah, and to be honest, that makes total sense, right? And there's a few things I want to touch on, but on the current one that you're saying now, I completely get it. I came out of school, I really wanted to work in sports. In my head, especially being in Ottawa, the Senators were doing bad. I was like, hey, I think one day I could turn the team around and make them a cool brand. I wanted to be the CMO for them one day, right? So with that, I had to get in, and I ended up working for Atletico Ottawa as a new franchise at the time. And, I think during that process, I definitely learned, hey, like, what do I value more? And I think I was more interested in the business side of things than actual sports. And then when I took a step back, and I was like, hey, like, I don't think this is something I want to do full-time. Right? Where you're saying it's a lot of commitment. You got to push all the way. And if you're more interested in the business side of things, but then you're doing things for, on-field, off-field, left, right, center, it's very different, right? So I definitely understand, the effort and the work that you put into it. And I guess going from there, too, one of the things you said in your story that I found pretty interesting was emailing everyone at the Blue Jays. The reason why that stood out to me is I think I had a guest that worked for the Canadians and then someone else that also worked for the Maple Leafs, funny enough, and they did something similar to actually get in. And I think the person with the Canadians, if I wasn't mistaken, they were doing an internship with the Alouettes when they were in university, and they wouldn't pick up their personal phone calls. And then they called through the Alouettes number because they were at the office. And then I guess it said Montreal Alouettes. Person in the office finally picked up the phone and said, oh, hey, how's it going? And it's like, oh, hey, like, it's me. Like, you haven't picked up my calls. Like, hey, can we chat? I wanted to interview. And that's how they got in, which is funny enough, maybe similar to yourself a bit, where you're just trying to find that door and make your own opportunity for yourself, which is pretty cool. And then, I guess going on from there, you spent quite some time at the Blue Jays. So what was that experience like, and where did it go from there?
So, it's, you ever hear like that saying, like, careful what you wish for, right? So it's funny because my dream came true, right? So there I am, I'm working, like, the first, 5 years was a complete blur. Like, so I started in 2002 with them. And, everything is going, like, it's perfect. I'm living the dream, as they say, right? But again, it's not all like, again, you have to love it like I did, because the amount of hours that you work 80 hours a week, you work all night, you work weekends. I got to be in the office on a Saturday at 8 a.m. You got to be in the office on Sunday at 8 a.m. We played 1 o'clock games. You got to be there 4 or 5 hours. Being in the media relations department, there's a lot to do before the game starts. So you're making a life commitment. But here I was, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29 years old, living living downtown, and I was like living. It was fantastic, but I didn't look at it as work. I didn't look at it as work at all. I loved to be there. It was great. I'm working for Toronto Blue Jays. I'm watching baseball, which is exactly sounds so easy, but like that's what I did. And the time, and it was funny because someone I'd work with, they always say, like, you having fun yet? Because you're running around like crazy every single day for, unfortunately baseball is 162 games, so you have 81 home games, which is insane. The fact that you play every day, so you're working every single day for 181 days in a year, because if you count spring training, if you count even the off days, and so it's like it's a commitment for your life. So 7 months where you're just like, that's your life. So if you're and I was fine with it. I loved it, and that was everything for me. Then there was, I could talk about the job itself. To work in the media relations department for the Toronto Blue Jays is to be right in the action, to like see how everything is, like, doing interviews with the players, the coaches, the manager, working behind the scenes, going on some road trips with them, and it's crazy. It's just insane that the job it was great, but about, I think it was like, so if I started in '02, so I think it was around 2010 or 2011. I'm coming home on the subway at night, like I always do, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm like, I don't think I want to go to work tomorrow. Just first time I ever felt that way. It was literally the only time I ever felt that before. I'm like, what's this? And I'm like, no, you're just tired because you've just worked 18 straight days, and it's Saturday, and you don't want to be in at 8 a.m. on Sunday. Like, but I never thought that way before. I never felt that way before. So I'm like, I just kind of shook it off. You wake up in the morning, it's like, oh, that was nothing. Like, I was just tired, right? And then, so that was in 2010 or 2011. Well, a couple of years go by, no problem. So 2013, right? So I have my first kid, my son. And I don't know, it wasn't maybe that per se, but that thought I had in the subway was happening more now. Like, it came back and it was happening more. It's like, oh, I'm like thinking like, okay, so like I'm kind of I'm an adult now. So I'm an adult now. I've transitioned from like I'm not saying a kid, but I've transitioned from like a single person living on his own to like, like having a father or something like that. So I'm like, maybe being the coordinator of baseball information for the Toronto Blue Jays right now isn't where I'm supposed to. Like, these questions start coming to my mind. Am I growing in my job? A little, not as much as I'd like. Are you getting paid a lot of money? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Again, these things I didn't ask myself before because it didn't matter to me. And then number 3, it's like, well, do I want to be doing this? Do I want to be coming home late at night? Do I want to be? And I started asking. I didn't say yes or no to those questions, but I started asking myself those questions. And every day after that one, just never got better. I never I basically broke a promise I made to myself. I said to myself when I started back in 2002, I said, if this actually ever becomes a job for you, you have to quit. You got to do something else because you've just lost the whole point to why you did this in the first place. So I was like, okay, well, and I didn't do anything about it. I was every single day, every year. So basically, Christopher, like every year after I had that thought, like in 2000, let's even call 2013 when I was really doing it. Every year after that, in my mind, I became less qualified for another job somewhere else in anything, in any industry, in any facet, anything. Every single year that went by, I was missing something. And, people talk a lot about like their like accomplishments. And I do have I have a few, but like, that's not even the point. The point, like, I feel sometimes like when I hear someone say like, oh, I made a mistake here, or I didn't think of it like this, or I've learned, I know people say it as a cliche, but like I have learned more from making a mistake than I do from anything else. I don't think it's wrong to talk about stuff you did wrong or you failed at. So I felt like I say all that because I feel like I failed myself for those 3 or 4 years that I didn't learn a new skill in the off season. Like the off season is busy, but it's not nearly as close as it is during the season. I have time. There was just excuse not to. And I get a new skill. I'm already in the Blue Jays. I'm already there. Why not talk to the guy in marketing? Why not talk to the guy in corporate partners? Why not talk to a guy in ticketing? Why not talk to a guy in social media and just, hey, what are you doing here? Like what's going on here? Like maybe I'm interested in something else now. I didn't take advantage of any of it. I didn't do any of that stuff. So eventually, in 2017 or 2016, the new regime came in. In 2017, they completely cleaned house. They gutted. They let go of 40 people. Right, I was one of them, and finally I got the kick in the butt that I needed. Like I wasn't going to do it myself, so I needed somebody to do it for me, and that goes on to the next chapter, right? But I feel like it's important to say it because I got exactly what I wanted. I was in the place I always wanted to be, and by the end of it, I hated it. Just being honest. I think some people, I was telling you, some people need to hear that it's not always exactly what you wish for.
Yeah, and to be honest, I really appreciate you saying that because obviously the podcast started off where it's more sports-based routes, and I'm trying to do everything. Right. So there's still a lot of people that kind of tune in with that mindset. But I find when I do have some of those guests come on, it's always shining the light of, the grind of sports is amazing, right? You're so, not that, of course you're lucky, it's a cool job, but you're so lucky that you get to work 24/7, 365, and, not many people get to do it, but you're fortunate because you get to do that. So I find seeing the other side, or maybe the real perspective, depending who I'm talking to, right, on how they view it, is kind of refreshing too, right? Because I kind of, nothing close to you in regards to the amount of time I did in sports. I had one season, and then I quickly realized, I'm like, hey, I actually like building business and all that stuff. I don't like putting out fires. And that's what I personally felt at the time, or what I was doing in sports was more so putting out fires. I wasn't building anything, right? Like the team, the logo, it all matters essentially what's happening on the field, but I can't really build like this huge business out of it to an extent in regards to what I had in my mind. So I find that really refreshing to kind of hear. And even as you're saying that too, there's one point that you said how you felt with every year going by, you felt less qualified. That's something I think is kind of interesting to dive into, just because, recently, let's say 6 months ago, I kind of decided, hey, I think I'm going to leave sports and look for another opportunity away from, the sports marketing agency I was doing as well. And then when I was applying for these jobs, I felt I had, great experience, but it wasn't necessarily applicable to, let's say, the tech industry, right? So then I was like, hey, I need to prove myself, because apparently those years I did don't necessarily translate. And obviously now it's working out. But I find that pretty interesting, because when you compare the two, like a manager of partnerships at a team, you have the manager title, but then when you look at it from, let's say, a tech position, it's very different, right? Because it's the book of business of the people that are fans of the sport, or people that are tuning in, and you're playing with local businesses. Whereas when you're at a business, you really got to try to blow it up and make it tech. So I think that's kind of an interesting point you touched on, that I think is very different from some of the things we've heard on the podcast.
And like to that, right? So I'll tell you a quick little analogy. I tried to explain to somebody. So are you a Seinfeld guy? Do you like Seinfeld?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so Kramer, right? Now, I'm not saying that I did my job as good as Kramer does. Just not saying that at all. But what I am saying is, so Kramer played his position, his role in the show so well to the point that no one can ever see him. So when the show's all said and done, it's over, everybody says goodbye, nobody can see Kramer other than just being Kramer. So if he's ever going to get another role again, or another role in a movie or in a show or whatever, he's going to have to be a quirky, goofy guy. He's not going to be a romantic comedy. He's not going to be a murder mystery. Like, he could do that, but someone has to see that he can do, that they'd want him, and they'd have to give him the opportunity to do that, right? But he's an actor. He can act. What difference does it make, right? So why I'm saying that is because I felt like after the 15 years with the Blue Jays and 5 years with the rest of it, with the other sports, working in sports I've done. So after 20 years, what do they see me as? They see me as a communications or PR professional in the sports industry. So if I want to get a job with a tech company, like if I want to work for Netflix, I want to for Home Depot, who cares? Name any non-sports organization there is, they're not going to see what they want. They're just going to see Erik Sports, Media Relations, and they'll be like, no, we're going to find someone that fits this. Like, where he is just that. There's some truth, like there might be some truth to that. Like, so for who's to say? I don't know. That's the feeling I get. So if you want to cross over, someone has to see something in you, or give you the opportunity to do that, because they are actually different. Like, to go from sports to a non-sports thing, it could be done, no question about it. It's not like but it is different. It is different. And people say, oh, it's transferable skills. And it is transferable skills. But again, someone has to see past. So someone has to see, well, I used the Kramer analogy. You got to see past that goofy guy, that he can be serious too, right?
Yeah, and to be honest, as you're saying that too, I know I've chatted with people about this, where it seems like sometimes, I know we're focusing on sports a bit too much, and we'll continue on with your route, but I've seen where maybe people hit an age, and maybe kind of similar to you too, where they're like, hey, I want to be coming home to my kids. I don't want to be staying out late because of work and so on and so forth. And they may be let's say late 20s, early 30s. I've seen that a lot on LinkedIn, people that I met in university that hit that age, and they're like, hey, I'm going into tech now. I can't keep doing the low pay, tons of hours, etc. So they kind of hit that wall. And then when you see maybe the titles they potentially had in sports, where they're directors, and they transfer over to another industry, kind of like what you're saying, they almost have to go back, prove themselves, and work their ways up, or gain that experience in another space, because sometimes it is quite different, right? Where I know even from some of my experiences from a hockey startup to a team, etc., the tools that are used and how things are run are far different at times depending on the team you're with, right? Just in regards to when you're working at a larger company, they have so many things in place, processes, procedures, tools, etc., to make sure you're advantageous. Where sometimes with the team, it feels like you're, hey, let's all just pull in this direction, figure out how to get there to an extent, right? So it's pretty interesting that you're saying that. And then I guess post Blue Jays, what was that like, right? Because I know you're saying, you got that kick that you needed. Did you still want to stay in sports after the Blue Jays? Or is that something maybe kind of similar to what you're saying where you're like, hey, like this is what maybe fits at the moment, and you had to kind of almost start repositioning yourself?
Yeah, you could be starting all over again. So like, I didn't, anything was on the table. Everything and anything I was open, like I had been closed-minded for so long that I'm like, it's now time to do the opposite, right? And like be open and do whatever it is that, don't say no to anything. Don't have any preconceived ideas of what it can be until you go, just do it and go for it, right? So like a few months go by, 4 months go by, and then I can't remember. Oh yeah, it was a mutual friend. So I had a friend who introduced me to somebody else, and this person was like the head of the entertainment for the Toronto Wolfpack, which was again another new. It was a new sports team that just arrived in Toronto that was like trying to make a name for themselves in a very crowded sports market, right? So I'm like, what is, like, I didn't know anything about rugby at all, right? Never watched rugby, didn't know anything about it, and it was like, it's a different kind of rugby. It's rugby league. I don't need to get into that. It's just a different version of it. So I'm like, but I am learning. Like, I'm like, okay, so the guy wants me to call. Like, he thought, hey, this might be a good opportunity for you to get back in. And I didn't care. Like, it didn't have to be sports for me. I just wanted something different, something new. So I'm like, okay. So I go in and meet this person, and they're like, yeah, well, like, look, as you know, you have the Toronto Maple Leafs, you have the Toronto Raptors, you have the Toronto Blue Jays, you have the Toronto Argonauts, you have Toronto FC. It's like, but we want some action too. Like, are you able to, like, would you be able to get media exposure for this team? Like, could you do that? I said, I'll certainly try. So he's like, okay, well, like, let's work something out, and we'll get you in there and get started. So I came in their 2018 season, which was their second season. But it was interesting because with the Blue Jays, you don't need to get any media to come to your game. They're coming all the time. They're too much. They're like, you have too much to handle to the point where you're just trying to manage the media. You don't even think about trying to get them to come. Doesn't even enter your mind. It's not a problem. So this is the exact opposite now. So I'm on the other side of it. So I need to get media to come to this. The very first game, I show up and he's like, okay, we got 2 people. There's 8 other spots on this small makeshift press box. Like, we got to start filling them. I said, okay, well, so now you're flexing a completely different part of your brain now. So it's like, okay, well, how do I entice media to come to this? They don't know anything about it, myself included. I have to sell something. I don't know what I'm selling just yet, but it's something's there. And I'm start like thinking and using, like, I didn't ever have to use my brain like this when I was with the Blue Jays because they don't need you to. Someone's already doing what you think you want to do anyway. So, now it's like you have to think on your own. It's like I went from being the youngest person with the Blue Jays in my department at 40 years old, by the way, when it came to the end of it, to the oldest person with the Wolfpack where I was working, and just watch. I'm like, okay, well, all right. So I'm gonna have to start like I'll use my I made contacts over 15 years. So like sure, like I definitely reached out to them. I wouldn't even say like, let's just, come cover this. I just start with coffee first. Just like, hey, I haven't spoken to you. Like, how's it going? Just start something easy. And then eventually it leads into like, well, I'm now working for this, Toronto Wolfpack. It's this new team. They're trying to make, their own imprint on the city and the sports landscape in Toronto. And I'm here to help them do that. And honestly, it just, I got like rejuvenated to the fact where I'm like, okay, well, like I can make an impact and like you can feel it. You're not just like one of 250 now. You're one of 8, and like every contribution that you feel like you've made, it's like it goes further than what I could have done before. So it's like, okay, and like we start getting players on mainstream interviews, and we're getting mainstream action. And by the time we were done, so 2020 when COVID hit, we were filling out the press box, we were filling out the stands, we were borderline over capacity, and everything just worked. It was an all-star team behind the scenes, and like I said, going from the youngest to oldest, I learned more with the Toronto Wolfpack in 2 years than I did in 15 years with the Blue Jays, and it wasn't even close. It wasn't even close because I never had to like solve a problem like that before.
And would you say that's almost more so where, I guess you could say that about maybe smaller market teams, or maybe because Toronto there's so much competition. You're essentially kind of building a business, right? Where maybe when there's an appetite for it, it kind of does it on its own. But I think maybe that's what it is, right? Where it's like sink or swim to an extent. And were you referring to Elliot earlier?
No, not Elliot. It's funny. Elliot was like the game and entertainment guy.
Yeah.
And he was incredible, by the way. I love Elliot. No, this guy, his name was Joe, and he was like he ran the beer garden. He ran like the party part of it. The party side, like the beer garden that we'd have after each game.
Yeah.
He ran that whole thing. So, yeah, he was the one that got me in there. That's who I met through a friend of mine.
Sure. And then obviously going back to the Wolfpack, I guess for those who know, they kind of came to a somewhat of an abrupt end. How did that kind of maybe impact your career from that? Because obviously that's another wall you're then hitting from there. So what did those next steps look like?
Yeah, and I was for sure. And like I was gonna say to the point that you made, like when you go from working in Rogers, like like it's Rogers is Rogers. It's extremely stable. You're fine. Like as long as you're working there, like you're good. Nothing financially you have to worry. But like when you're working for a small organization, a startup, we were a startup, essentially a startup in a large market. Every day, it's day to day. It really is. Like the mindset that you have, it's day to day. You don't know, no one's, tomorrow is definitely not promised to you, right? That was the mindset that we all had, right? And because you have that mindset, it allows you to do things that you wouldn't do with the Blue Jays. So, with the Wolfpack, and I'll get to the abrupt end there, but like, you can try all sorts of things in marketing. You can try, and like Elliot can do anything he wants. He's got no, it's a ceiling. Like he can do anything he wants. Like we had 2 mascots at one point. 2 mascots. Like with with a larger organization like the Blue Jays or the Maple Leafs or the Raptors, there's too many stakeholders to make. You just can't even say you can't say one word wrong. You have to be super, super, super careful. You can't be like aggressive. So the Wolfpack, the reason why we had all the success was because our social media team and our marketing, and we can be as like creative and crazy as we wanted to be, and there was no restriction. But so it was fun. It was 2.5 years. And the abrupt end was the abrupt end, and COVID hit, and we were we have one person who's an owner. That's it. There's one guy that funds the team. You live or die like based on this person's success and whatever he's doing, right? He can say one morning, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of spending millions for this, right? He can wrap it up at any point, and that's what we had to do. Like we kind of forced our hand, COVID, and that was that. So here I am again. So now contemplating everything. Like, do I want to stay in sports? Like now that this Wolfpack thing's over, do I want to go another direction? Kind of like I stayed in sports. Basically, I stayed in sports. But I didn't have the same like passion or love for it, but. So I'm just looking for now like cool. I'm at the point where I'm looking for like interesting opportunities and like okay, like so there's the CBL. I'm like, oh, the CBL, the basketball league, the Canadian basketball. I really like what they're doing there, right? And like I really, it looks really good. Like very successful. A lot of good stories. Like maybe I'll give that a try. So I basically did the same thing. Started throwing my name out there, and like I knew the Scarborough Shooting Stars they were having their first like their inaugural year. In 2022, so I'm like, well, here maybe I can go in there and do what I just did, and get them recognition and all that stuff. So I met with the owners, and like they said, yeah, you're good. Like let's go, and I did that for a year. I realized after that year with Scarborough Shooting Stars, it's like, well, I think I'm done. I think I'm no longer interested in sports the way I was. Like I've done this before. I wasn't fulfilled, if that makes any sense. So and that was it. So I'm like, at that point on, I'm like, well, like I've completely changed my mindset. Like I'm not just like it used to be for sports for me, like wins or losses and how many home runs do you hit and like how many great plays do you make and blah blah blah. But now I'm just like. At that point, I was just like, I'm more interested in like the entrepreneur stuff. I'm more interested in like tech, like still maybe sports, but now like the business side of the whole business side of it and how fascinating that is. I'm like, wow, I missed that whole, all those years. I completely just shut it off or I didn't even open. And then like, wow, it's amazing like how interesting that is. And that's kind of what brought me to the Umpires Media thing. And so yeah, and that's where I kind of pivoted to at that point. Like I want to start my own thing, my own business, like my own ideas, my own this to kind of like, okay, like let's see, like there's no better time than now. There's no better time, right? I've played the sports thing, like I was 20 years almost, like it's good enough. Like I did it. Like let's see what else is out there, basically.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And obviously, different timelines in regards to how we've done things. But I kind of had the same thing. I started the podcast out of school. COVID hit. I was doing like an esports tournament to connect students together, etc. And I was learning so much just from doing, right? And then when I worked at a team, it was good. It was great. But at the end of the season, I was just getting burnt out. The amount of hours I was working, and I'd come home, I'd host like a esports tournament every night. Then I'd be editing, and I was releasing 2 podcasts a week at that point because it was COVID. I was like, what else am I going to do? And I realized at the end of the season, I'm like, I've learned way more just from what I was doing for the podcast and that esports tournament that I started than I did the team. So I was coming up with an idea. Then I'm like, hey, how do I do this and how do I solve it? Right, so I can definitely understand the sentiment you're coming at from there. So with that then, because I agree with that stuff and I love that direction as well. What kind of things are you now doing, and how did that pivot look like? And maybe share a bit more about what you have going on now and what that looks like.
So, a lot of it came from just like listening to podcasts like yours, to be honest. Like I listened to a bunch of them. Like I'm a podcast guy, and like I was only interested in like business of sports podcasts, business podcasts, right? So it was like I'm listening, I'm like, okay, like there's like a lot of really good ideas out there, and like how do you like generate revenue, and how do you monetize this, and how do you use social media to do this, and how you like all these things. Like I just found so fascinating. Like, well, what do I like, or like what am I into? I'm like, oh, like I didn't really have to like ask that long, because sure enough, I met somebody who had this company called Umpires Media. His name's David. So he had Umpires Media, and Umpires Media basically was like a database of rules that he acted out. So like in baseball, it's got like a million different rules, right? It's like the most rulies sport of them all, right? So, and what he did was he hired a crew. Like he comes from like a TV background. So he hired a crew. This was a while ago, like a long time ago. He hired a crew. They were in Florida, and they reenacted with these actors all the plays in baseball. And what he did, he came out with an app, and he came out with like at the time like a kind of like a DVD kind of thing, and where he would sell these rules, and so people would now know or use if they work in baseball, or need to know, or umpire schools and all that stuff. So, but he came to the end of it. So he was like, okay, I'm done with this. It's not going where I wanted it to go. So like I met him through a family friend, and we got together, and he's like, look, this is what I'm like. We're kind of done with this. Like, do you have any ideas? So I'm like, well, I said, not right now, but like, let me think about it. So I thought about, I'm like, okay, well, if rules is like, if working within this framework of like, it's got to be baseball rules specific. How do you make that fun? Like, how do you want to get that out there? So I'm like, well, why don't you go through all the sports, find like these plays that come up. It doesn't have to be baseball. Like, let's not limit it to that. Like, let's do everything. Find these like rules that happen in the game, like in real time, and be like, okay, like Chris, like you be the judge. Like, is this person safe or out? Is that person, was it a trap ball? Was it not? Like, was it a foul? Was it not? Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, and then find these things, put it on social media, do YouTube content, and then you can either analyze it or not even analyze it. You can just put it up there and say, well, what do you think? What was this right? Like, what was this right call? And start getting like a more of an interactive thing. So I said, why don't we do something like that? And he's like, perfect. So that's what we went out and did. We got like a small little group together. We put our own YouTube channel. We changed the name of it to What's Your Call Sports, to basically say like, what's your call? You're the expert here, as opposed to like, here's what happened, but like, here's why it happened, and here's why it was called this way, and blah, blah, blah. So you make them fun, like, like LeBron James or whoever, like using like real, like, big time athletes, and say, okay, here's the play. And so the goal was to put together like a YouTube content, and then take little parts of the YouTube, put them out like TikTok, Instagram, and just start getting engagement, start getting enough numbers where you can start getting advertising and stuff like that. So that's the kind of stuff that was interesting me. Now we tried it for like 6 to 8 to 9 months, and like at some point, just again, same situation. It's like run out of money. Like, okay, well, we ran out of money. We tried. It's not over yet. Like, I have something that we're trying to put together, but again, it needs investment. And there's like all these other things that, because there's tech involved, and as you know, like anytime tech's involved, to make an app and to like develop it and to like try it out and to like there's money, so someone has to see the same vision as you. So we're pushing something else right now that's kind of like that, but a little different. That's like kind of like my passion. Like, I have like my real job, like my 8, in my case, it's 6 in the morning to 3, which I love. I work at Meltwater. It's a media information communications company, but they're a tech company where they help companies just see how their brand's doing in the news. And, there's reporting, and then there's making newsletters, and that's what I do right now. So I love it. So I'm doing, as you can see, I tell you all that just because, just kind of branching out and doing something a little different than where I started. And to be honest with you, it's so funny. Like, I haven't watched a full baseball game since my last day working there in 2017, and baseball was like my life. So when I tell people that, they just don't believe me, but it's true.
That's pretty interesting you mentioned that, because I've kind of noticed a similar type of thing where when I was in high school, I was every single sport you can think of, Bleacher Report, Instagram, Facebook. I followed everything, right? I was on top of it all. You could tell me about the prospects. I knew all about it. And then when I worked in sports, I think maybe because I was doing the sports business podcast, the esports tournament, there's just so much sports that when I shut everything off, I still love my Senators.
Yeah.
But then other than that, I kind of, I don't think until this year, just because of sports betting with my buddies, because that kind of brought me back into it, I don't think I've ever watched an NFL game in the last 4 years, right? Yeah. Since I had that initial job in sports. Yep. And I kind of noticed a similar type of thing. I was like, you know what, I think I almost overdid it, and kind of realized maybe that isn't actually what my passion is. I much more like the business stuff, still love the Sens, and I'll tune into that stuff. But everything else, like my buddies that were never into it and now they are, I have nothing to talk to them about because I don't know about these prospects anymore because I don't really pay attention. But I can absolutely understand that. And yeah, and what you're saying about Umpire Media and having your job at Meltwater, I can completely understand that, right? Where you kind of use two sides of yourself, right? Where you can have that outlet to do your, let's say, real work like I have as well. You're 9 to 5, you're 6 to 3 in your case. You do that, you grow, you learn, you're in a great team. But then after hours, that's where you can let your creative juices fly and throw things at the wall, see what sticks versus what doesn't, have that outlet, which I completely understand through this podcast and some other projects. But yeah, that's very cool, and I appreciate you sharing everything to date so far. But before we wrap up, I got 2 questions I like asking every guest at the end. And the first one is, we went through everything so far to date, and I've done this 167 times now, and I've asked it 167 times, and I've said this too. I'm going to live until I'm 103, hopefully, right? And I'm going to be on a rocking chair thinking about all the good times I've had to date so far. I'm going to put you in the same position, right? 103-year-old Erik, you're sitting on a rocking chair just thinking about all the good times you've had to date so far in your career. What's maybe one story that's going to stand out to you at 103 on that rocking chair that you're still going to be able to remember and go, wow, isn't that crazy that I actually got to do that for work at one point? Is there one of those stories that stand out to you?
Yeah, so I'm going to flip it. I know what you're saying. I'm going to flip that story, and it wasn't it's something I'm always going to remember, but it wasn't like a highlight. You know what I mean? Well, it could be. So my point, the story I have is, so the Jose Bautista Game 5 home run against Texas, the bat flip home run, the shot heard around Canada, right? I didn't see it. I'm working there, so I'm in the media relations department. I'm in the press. I didn't see it. I missed it. I completely, everything I worked for, for all those years, we didn't win anything, and we finally get there. We're finally at the cusp of turning the corner. We never make the playoffs. We never do anything. Blah blah blah. And then it's we finally get there, and all these years, because this was 2015. This would have been my 13th or 14th season by now. I'm no, 13th season. I'm this is it, right? And I missed it. I missed it because I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan. I'm working the game. I'm in it. So and I'll never forget when I heard it, because I was in my office, because if you remember that game, there was a play. It was a controversial play with the catcher. He threw the ball, hit the batter, and no one knew what was going on. Everyone went crazy. So I had to leave the press box, go back to our office, find a rule book, trying to find a needle in a haystack. I have to then, once you get the rule book, then you have to find where the rule is in the rule book. And then I have to let all the media know, because the game was, the manager was protested the game. So I had to go find the rule, what just happened on the field? What was the protest for? What is a protest? How does this work in the playoffs? All these things, and I have to do this. So I'm not even in this stadium. I'm in our back office, and I have the TV on in my office while I'm making photocopies and trying to get all the media the rules. That's how we did it back then. And there's a delay. So I have my TV in the office, but there's a delay. So what's happening on the field is in front of the TV. So I've watched so much baseball in my life that I know what the sound. I can tell what happened on the field just by sound. I don't even need to see it. Like, I know what a single sounds like. I know what a pop up like. And that inning, that seventh inning, was like something from a movie. Because like Texas, like who played, they made like 3 or 4 errors in that one inning, and it was. And I'm listening to all this on delay, so I'm like, what are all these sounds? Like, it's like they're errors. So I'm like, okay, I got everything I need. Okay, I managed to get. I'm all ready to go. I go out the back door to our office to get in the hall, and I took maybe 5 steps. With like I have all this here. I took 5 steps, and I kid you not, I shook like the stadium shook to the point where I didn't like fall over, but like I caught myself, like I moved. That's the story. I would say back then that like I was there, but I didn't see it. I didn't see it live.
That's perfect. Moment. That's exactly why I asked that question.
That's how my life goes. Like that's totally me. Like you're there, but you're never there.
Yeah.
Just close, but you're no cigar.
To be honest, and I think with that too, I remember when I first realized I wanted to get into sports, I started meeting with people at the Senators, right? Because that was maybe similar to you with the Blue Jays. That was my dream team. I was like, hey, like I'd love to work for them one day. And I was speaking to someone, I think who was a director at the Senators, if I'm not mistaken. And they were telling me, they're like, oh, you love the Senators, you're a big fan? I'm like, yeah, I think from a business side I could be a lot of advantage, but I'd love to help the team, right? And then they're like, if that's the case, they're like, not that you wouldn't be advantageous to have on the team, but they're like, a word of advice, never pull the curtain behind something that like kind of brings you joy. Essentially was the same. They're like, if you love the Senators and that's one of your hobbies or passions on the side, they're like, leave that be so you can still enjoy it. Because as soon as you pull the curtain, once you're working for them, you're not going to be able to put that curtain back. And maybe I don't know if that's the same thing for you, and maybe that moment kind of encompasses it all, where you're like, you know what, I never actually got to be a fan of it. I'm everything else rather than being a fan.
I wish I could have been a fan. I wish I could have.
Yeah.
I would have enjoyed it a lot. Me personally, it doesn't mean you can't enjoy the moment. It doesn't mean that at all. And this is just me how I am. Like,
oh, absolutely.
It doesn't mean it happens to somebody else or whatever. But like, it was just hard to. Sometimes it was hard to enjoy it because you weren't.
Yeah.
You weren't.
No, and that makes a ton of sense. Yeah. And I guess with that, then the last question I have, which I think should and usually does, puts a beautiful bow on it all. I like to say is, we went into the future, went to 103-year-old Erik. If we now go back in time using that same time machine and we go to 16, 17, 18-year-old version of yourself, right? Maybe when you're about to walk on Durham College campus for the first time, or even just kind of realizing, hey, the Blue Jays is my dream and I got to go to. If you can kind of go back in time and have a conversation with your younger self, what's one piece of advice that you've learned so far in your career that you would share with your younger self, saying, hey, like, this is something I've learned and you should know earlier on because I wish I did?
What I would say is to be as open-minded as possible, that there's no bad opportunity, right? You don't close any doors. Learn as many skills as you possibly can. Don't have tunnel vision. Think outside the box. You always have to do a good job of the one you're doing, like, while you're doing it, but like, there's nothing wrong with like seeing like what else is out there. Like with the Blue Jays, I'm isolated. I'm in my box, and then we're not even close. Our media relations department, wasn't even close to the marketing. Wasn't even close to social media. Wasn't even close to corporate partners. We were isolated. We were in our own little thing, and the rest of it was going on out there. So we didn't know what they were doing ever. That's the thing. So I say that point because when it comes time for you to know how to do something, I didn't learn how to do any of that stuff because it wasn't anywhere close to me. We were so separated. So it's like when I go out into the real world, it's like, okay, now you're looking for a job that's not in sports. Well, they want you to do all the things I didn't see. They want you to be able you can't just be like a media relations or PR person. You need to be able to communicate with social media. You have to be able to like put together something where you can entice corporate like sponsorship stuff, like actual real things. And that was not even so what I would say to my younger self is like, learn as much as you can, open your mind, like open yourself up to literally everything that's out there.
And that's why I asked that question at the very end, because I think it's a perfect way to end it all. And Erik, thank you so much for coming on. I've had an absolute treat speaking with you. Unless there's anything else you'd like to share, thank you for sharing your route.
All right. No, like, it was my pleasure. And I like, if you can use this to, like, if this can help someone. And again, this is just like my story. It doesn't mean like I would say, like, it's just something to think about. Like, if you love Nike, or if you love Google, or if you love like this, it doesn't mean you have to work there. It doesn't mean you have to work there. Like, when I was like, I taught for like half a year once, PR stuff anyway. So like one student said to me, and it was like really cool. He said, like, I love golf. I'm like, I want to get into sports. I'm like, well, why don't you go? I can help you find someone in the golf space. He goes, I was like, that's interesting. It's an interesting thought. I'm like, I wish I had thought of that, 20 years ago. Like, maybe you don't like them together. Maybe you just like golf and leave it at that.
Yeah.
That would be my one. That's what I would tell like the students or like using like a platform like this to, like, if this helped you, it just gives you another thought. Doesn't mean you have to do it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean you can't work for something that you really enjoy. It just means that, like, just something to think about. That's all.
Absolutely. And I grew up in Quebec. You're like 16, 17 years old, and I said, hey, I might want to work in sports. I was taking business classes, and they're like, hey, I think you have a mind for business. Maybe just keep sports as a passion. And I don't know why for the next 6 to 7, 8 years from then, I was so insulted by that comment. I was like, who does he think he is telling me to not combine the two? Now, maybe 10 years later or more, I guess, I was like, oh, I completely understand what they're saying. And that kind of touches on with that student. I was like, hey, like, that's kind of cool. Maybe sometimes you figure it out on your own, but that's a great way to end the podcast. And thank you again, Erik. And that's it for episode 167 of The Route. Stay tuned for next week's episode.